Now, Melody, I know that you were a very active participant in the mortgage industry during the first housing bubble bursting. Relative to the pain we saw in the housing market back then, what do you predict it's going to be this time around?
This is going to be much worse than what we experienced back then.
Welcome to Thoughtful Money. I'm Thoughtful Money founder and your host, Adam Taggart, welcoming you here for a special report on housing. I am joined by housing analyst Melody Wright. Melody, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Adam. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Look, thank you for dropping everything to join me for this special report that we're filming here. But I also want to let folks know, so we're going to get into Melody's latest update on the housing market, as well as some other big trends that are going on there that have her attention. She just got a hold of the December data, which is sort of changing or altering in some ways her outlook for the housing market for next year. We're going to get into that in just a moment, or for the rest of this year. But I also just want to note that Melody is also going to be a featured speaker at the upcoming Thoughtful Money Spring Online Conference on Saturday, March 15th. And not only is she going to do a deeper dive into her housing outlook then, and of course we'll have more updated data by then too, but she'll also be available to be taking Q&A from the audience. So you'll be able to ask her whatever questions that are most burning brightly in your mind. So anyways, folks, real quick, if you want to sign up for that conference and lock in the early bird discount price, the lowest that we're offering, you can go do that over at thoughtfulmoney.com/conference. All right, Melody. Well, look, thanks so much for coming on. I asked you to come on to do this special report because we were talking briefly about how you had just finished doing your crawl through all the December housing data, and you actually shifted, I think, your call for where housing prices are going to go this year. And please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my recollection from the last time we had you on the channel, obviously you have a lot of concerns about where housing's going, but you were thinking, I am not quite sure ready to yet to predict that 2025 is going to be a down year for home prices on average nationally in the US. And then when we talked the other day, leading up to calling you on here, you said, well, I'm actually going to start calling for an actual decline in housing prices. Did I get it right?
You did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we dive right into that? So what was so important about the December data, and what did you learn by walking through it?
Yeah, so I think what was interesting about 2023 and 2024 was just how low transactions were, Adam. And, I think that what happened is because it was higher end homes or higher priced homes that were transacting, that median price remained very stubborn, and started accelerating because of who was buying. Additionally, after the BTFP in 23 and everybody kind of got a hall pass and we're all going to get bailed out, don't have to worry about anything. It's going to be no landing. The builders themselves also didn't have to really cut as aggressively as I expected for 2024. And they were able to, the housing market just kind of skated along. And 2023 and 24 look very similar to one another, which is so fascinating if you just think about how much drama was involved. And maybe it's because I'm watching the headlines like a hawk that I see it, but it felt like, it was either going to be, oh my gosh, housing starting again, it's going to take off like a rocket, or oh my God, we're never selling another home. You were just waffling between these two because of, we started out 24 with the pivot in December of 23 from Jay Powell, and I mean, the builders, they all got just crazy excited, everybody did. And then it was kind of like, oh, wait, that's not going to work out so much. Then we rounded the corner to the summer, very similar. We started to see the rates come down and everybody thought the Fed's cutting, yay. And then boom, the Fed cuts, mortgage rates stay sticky. We've talked about that in detail. And so there was just a lot of drama in the housing market. But nothing really actually, it wasn't all that dramatic what actually happened. And so what I noticed, it was so bizarre. So you saw at the end of last year that sales just took off like a rocket at the end, like late summer, fall, when everybody thought that those rate cuts were going to make a difference. And, that on top of like the inventory just came to market. I mean, it flooded. You can actually look at, as rates were going down, the correlation of inventory going up because you had motivated sellers that were going to take that opportunity. And so we saw a very strong, October, unseasonably strong. And that was even with, Helene and Milton and all of that. And then November started to slow down as people started to realize, oh my gosh, like those rate cuts aren't happening. We had cancellations. I think Redfin came out, highest cancellations. And then you look at December and it was like the engine got started again, which made no sense because rates had started ticking way up. And it was, and so it didn't make a lot of sense. And I started looking, and so at an aggregate level, it was shocking strength, put it that way, for seasonally for what was going on. And I think part of that, of course, had to do with the Trump, election, like euphoria. I would say that I think some in the country, of course, on the other side, people were not euphoric.
Mhm.
They were very upset. But there was a lot of euphoria. Everybody's like lighter regulations. The party started, Trump's going to come in, he's going to take care of business. And so everybody just got, I think we're very optimistic. And I was thinking maybe that's what it is, right? But then I started looking at the micro level, Adam, and that's where I started changing my mind about and by the way, guys, let me say this up front. 2024, 2025 is not going to be a blowout year like 21 and 22. And when I'm saying stronger sales is going to be very marginally stronger, about even just a 2% increase. But with everything that's going on, that's kind of notable. A lot of people are calling for much higher. But go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing. When you're talking about shocking strength in December and stronger sales, um, are you talking about transactions or are you
Yes.
talking about prices?
I'm sorry. I should be clear because it's transactions, but it has a lot to do with what I'm going to say about prices. And sorry, so
Okay.
it's the long-winded. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. And so, as in terms of prices for the end of the year, they were kind of up and down. It was a very bizarre into the season. You had the new homes kind of go from very low, like 406,000 to 420,000 the next month for a high median price. And existing has just kind of petered out, existing home price. But we'll talk about that price forecast kind of after I get over this volume forecast because the two are, of course, linked. And so when you looked at a kind of micro level, and I track over 80 markets, it was noteworthy strength in markets that in reality should have slowed down, especially out west, because you saw in November things slow down, but then it re-accelerated again. And what you could see is this was motivated selling, but it was a little bit more than motivation. It was actually you're starting to see distress selling.
Okay. So
And
it's
that is
going from motivation to desperation.
correct. And
Okay.
it's is that in mainstream media right now? No. I still oversee client books, as you know. And what I was seeing at the same time that I'm seeing this kind of strength in sales, I'm doing delinquency reviews and I'm seeing people say things like, I'm trying to sell my house. Yes, I know I'm 30 days behind. I know I'm 60 days behind, but I'm trying to sell my house. It's been sitting on the market since September. And so delinquency, as we know, has been increasing. I've talked a lot about that with you, and that's continuing. Black Knight just came out with its December results, and month over month foreclosure starts increased 50% year over year, 26, I think 29%, and that's notable, Adam, because um, the starts are how you get people to call.
Mhm.
People will kind of put off calling into the servicer when they're behind. They feel embarrassed or they just don't want to deal with it. You get that notice in the mail that says, hey, your loan has been referred to foreclosure. If you're going to get a call, that's when you're going to get a call. And so we are seeing that foreclosure engine start back up because VA or the veterans was on a moratorium for foreclosure. And I know this is very long winded. I promise I'm going to get there, Adam.
That's all right. We're following.
And so delinquency was real. We had seen delinquency accelerate in June, and we with a push and pull of offering modifications, all of that good stuff. But then it reaccelerated again in the fall. And now we're kind of in the seasonal period for delinquency, but it is at a higher. It's the rate of change that I'm looking at, and it is the engine has started. What I mean started. It's not just idling, like it's starting to move. And so that hasn't happened for some time. So I think you've got the pressure of people could put pause. They could just hit pause button and say, 24, it's an election year. I don't know what's coming. I'm hearing about all these rate cuts. I'll be able to sell my house. My Zestimate looks just fine. And I think people put off all of those decisions they needed to make in 2024. What I call the big D decisions. Zellman talks about her 3Ds: death, divorce, default. Those are mine as well, but I add on the DOD, who moves people, thousands of people every year. And so a lot of people could even carry a home for another year thinking that they were going to be able to sell it when rates went down. Let's say they got a call back from work from home and they had to go back into the office. Well, they might be able to carry that home for a little bit while they moved and did all of that because they had all this hope, and they would do everything in their power because their estimate says X and rate cuts are coming and everybody's going to pile back in. And so everybody just put a pause on transactions last year, except for those who did really well in the stock market and were seeing the stock market going up and getting super excited about it, or those that just, have enough money that they don't care. But what you saw in December in areas that really, is you had a lot of motivated selling. And what does that mean? So sales were up, but prices were down.
Mhm.
Okay. And so that tells me that that is motivation. But in certain markets like Los Angeles, and this is before the fires, you were seeing it looked as if turning to distress just based on those price drops and how big they were, especially somewhere like Los Angeles, which should, people think is immune. Everybody thinks California is going to be immune to everything, you know, and a lot of people thought the fires were actually going to, make it even worse, and it will for the short term, but long term, I don't think so. So you're seeing those prices down and sales up, and markets that really shouldn't be moving this way. And I can list off some of them, but like Richmond, Virginia, Indianapolis, Charlotte. So go ahead.
Wow, no, I just was surprised by Richmond, Virginia, because that's what I've been hearing as that's the last place where you can get an affordable home, and lots of people are still moving there, so there's demand coming into the market. The fact that sales are up and prices are down there kind of surprises me. And I have my brother actually moved there a few years ago, so I know a little bit about that market. That's surprising.
Well, I'm going to surprise you with another one. Washington, D.C. So here's what's been happening in Richmond in that area. And believe me, I've had every Richmond realtor attack me. But it is just the numbers. You're actually seeing negative demographics from the city to the county. And so you are starting that flight because in Richmond you had a ton of new building as well. And so what's happening is people are moving out to the exurbs because
Mhm.
they got those rate buy downs and all of that. And it's kind of so it's like it goes out and now it's going to come back in as those prices in the city actually come down and people have to return to work. But yes, and Richmond, and that's happening. And DC has been the inventory build there has been incredible. Other places, Nashville. Everybody thinks Nashville is going to be where everybody from LA moves.
Mhm.
But it's not going to be enough, guys. Even if they do, there is just so much inventory in these cities. You can look at the builders right now, non-seasonally adjusted. They have 9.5 months of supply. As you know, Adam, I've been to these places, and I know that's underreported. And so there is a ton of supply in these areas. And at the same time, in most of these cities, you have multifamily coming online as well. Over 500,000 more apartments this year are going to be delivered. And then you have long term rental. And you can take like Zellman, for instance, their single family rental occupancy is at the lowest it's ever been in their survey. So you just have all of this housing.
Wow.
Yeah, right. It's all coming online at once. And this is why, when we recorded back in September, I think it was, I said 2025 is going to be, it's going to be a very interesting year. And it's because of this. So I think that we're actually going to see a little bit stronger sales, around 2%. But we're going to have price discovery, which we really, I think that when the whole thing is said and done, and all the revisions are in, I don't think home prices are where NAR is saying them right now. I don't think they are where census is saying them right now. I think they will get revised down. I don't know if you know this, but in 2011, the National Association of Realtors had to revise down 4 years of prices
No, I didn't.
because CoreLogic, who actually tracks recordings, county recordings. So if you sell your home, there's a recording that happens at the county. If you have you have a deed, and there's a consideration of that amount, and that's how CoreLogic was looking at median home prices. That's also how Case Shiller does it. So in 2011, CoreLogic called NAR out. Now, the thing about using the counties to look at prices is you have huge delays. And I think I've told you this before. During COVID, LA was about a year behind in
Mm,
recording documents. And so they're right outside of DC, actually, that used to be 365 days is how long it would take you to record a document. And so what happens, you can look at Case Shiller, for instance, and every month they revise the entire series, Adam. I'm talking years back, because they're getting more and more information. And so you can look at Case Shiller, and if you have the numbers, it'll literally every single component is revised every time they publish that thing. And so in a way, NAR and census both have about 6 months before they have to be honest, if that makes sense.
all right. So, but basically, their data is lagging data, is what you're saying.
Case Shiller, very lagging. They use a 3 month average, and it's also behind by a couple of months. And so it takes a very long time. And then it also changes significantly. So the National Association of Realtors, they base those median home prices that they publish on their proprietary database. The builders fill out a sheet and submit it to the census. That's how they do it.
Okay.
So, and they don't put those incentives in there, and so but looking at the NAR series, Adam, I'm getting to I believe that we're going to, in National Association of Realtors home price series, I believe we're going to see a 9% drop in 2025. In the census series, I believe we're going to see about a 6% drop.
Okay. Wow. All right. So, I mean, that's a national drop, national average you're talking about. So your mileage will likely vary depending upon where you live if you're watching this
Absolutely.
video. But if there's a 9% average price decline, that means some places are correcting by 20%, and some are
Correct.
flat.
Right.
All right. So let me just take stock of my notes here for a sec, Melody. So, okay, you just said the data that we're using basically to get a sense for, what houses are going for right now, you're saying is likely overstated. That
Correct.
data, a lot of that data is still from months ago, and it's not really reflective of what's happening right now on the ground. Um, you've said that uh, you're seeing transaction volume pick up, but prices weaken. You made a comment here, I just had to write down. You said there's so much inventory in these cities, and you mentioned cities like Nashville and other ones that are considered, at least up until recently, still pretty popular. You and I have been talking for long enough that much of what we're talking about right now, you and I have been predicting, saying, hey, this is what we think is likely to happen. Now it actually
Mhm.
really seems to be unfolding. One
Right.
of the things we talked about was this narrative of housing prices are always going to be pretty supported because we have this national housing shortage. And we talked about how we don't really have an inventory shortage of units. We might have an ownership imbalance or whatnot. But in terms of the number of units that are out there, there's probably plenty. And it seems like a lot of these units are now really beginning to hit the market in mass. And part of that's because builders have been building, so there's new inventory coming on. But a large part of that too is probably just you've finally got these sellers that thought they could ride this out, wait until for the Fed to ride to the rescue and wait for mortgage rates to come down. They're now having to capitulate, so they're getting more desperate. We have all these new categories you and I have talked about, like the short-term rental, folks that bought all these Airbnbs but are now losing money, and so they're starting to get out. Some of the institutions are starting to get out. So you're nodding as I'm saying all this, but it seems like we're beginning to see sort of this perfect storm of what you and I were talking about, which is you're going to start seeing inventory come onto the market from all different sources and probably right at the wrong time, right?
Correct.
So, okay, so
Absolutely.
it does seem like you feel like 2025 is, I'm going to say, the start
Correct.
of this normalizing, right? I'm going to
Right.
guess you don't think it's all going to wash out just in this current year, that we're probably looking at a couple years of this.
Yeah, I maybe 5, but yeah, I mean,
Well, okay.
I think that you're going to have the biggest drops in 25 and probably 26, and then, a few more years of just washing it out. In some areas may correct sooner than later. But Adam, it was so amazing. One of the other things that really kind of changed my idea about how low sales volume would be next year was two studies came out like within weeks of each other, one from the Cato Institute and one from Taylor and Francis, challenging the housing shortage narrative. And I felt that they were well timed, if you know what
Hmm.
I mean.
Yep.
And Taylor and Francis specifically said, we've built 3.3 million more homes than we have households. And that's even with the revised census estimates that showed that increase in population due to immigration. So, and we'll talk about that too, because that's going to be impactful. And so you've got two big articles out there challenging this whole housing shortage narrative, as well as the Joint Center for Housing at Harvard every year puts out a demographic update. Last year, it was amazing because it said, hey, we pulled forward demand. There's not going to be a ton of demand. And none of our housing bulls had an answer or would even acknowledge that study. But this year, it was even more of a banger, Adam. And they talked about the 15.6 million boomers who are not going to need housing between 2025 and 2035.
Hmm.
And then the 23 million from 2035 to 2045. And so you think right now our average household size is 2.6 people. If you think about then what that means on a daily basis in terms of how and at the same time that these studies came out, Adam, it's so weird how the world works. It's just like if I say something today and then you hear it tomorrow, and you never heard it before, it's just odd like that in the stream, I guess.
Yep.
And over the holidays, I had helped a couple of people in the past with like default issues that they just wanted my advice because, I used to run default. I know default in all of the states, and that's a very rare thing to know. And so, but over the holidays, Adam, I got several phone calls, emails asking for help with a default situation. And then a lot of it was tied to inheritance property, where perhaps one of the family members was supposed to be caretaking the property, making sure it was okay for all the other um, uh, folks that were going to inherit, but then decided to take out a loan because they had a POA, and then whoops, then they couldn't pay that loan, and now it's in default. And and it wasn't one case of this, Adam. It was several people all at once. And so I think what you're seeing is it's finally, like you said, and rightly so, all these things that we knew were on our path forward that were going to happen are starting to happen. And those default, breaks have kind of been lifted as all of these workouts have run through the system. So I think that we are entering also that time where all the fact that these boomers not needing these homes anymore, you're going to start to really see that have an impact as well. As I've seen several cases of either those homes are going to market because the kids can't afford them and so they want to sell it. I've also seen cases where the kids are going to move in and retire there, and sell the home they're in. And so it's going to be a consolidation one way or the other. And that means more and more inventory. And so I think the combination of all of that inventory, people putting off decisions in 2024 that they really should have acted on, as well as the stock market, I it's just not as strong as it was, before, say, DeepSeek, right? Like, I think that
Mhm.
things have changed, sentiment has changed, and although we might be having some ups and downs here, and by the way, I mean, we're all, I titled my last Substack "Shock and All" because I think we're all just trying to figure out what's happening. But I think that there's some wobbliness there, and whether retail has obviously piled in to buy the dip, but hedge funds have not. And so I think that the wobbliness there is going to keep our top 20%. They're going to be a little hesitant, as well as these disasters on both coasts, where insurance is absolutely going to be more expensive next year. And you probably saw the emergency State Farm coming out and saying, you know what, we're going to have to raise rates by 22% because we're in an emergency situation.
Right. Right. All right. So this is an interesting question. So listening to you, Melody, I hear that it's kind of a story of the past, present, and the future. We have the I think what we consider to be the overvaluation of housing that past policy has led us to, right? So ZERP, uh, inflated housing prices. We then had the huge surge in cost of living that has made the cost of ownership much more expensive. So that's why we're where we are today, where the record percentage of Americans can't afford to buy a house, right? It's unaffordable for them, right? Record levels of
Right.
unaffordability. So I think what I hear you saying is, look, that's starting to unwind right now. Like we're starting to see defaults. We're starting to see that a lot of homeowners just can't keep carrying their home the way that they were, and there's not enough demand there, or supplies coming on that's pushing prices down. So that's all about a reckoning of what's led up into now. Now we have the present, right? So that's the shock and awe that you were talking about, right? We have all this uncertainty up in the air. We have markets that are really overvalued, stock markets that are really overvalued. If they crack, then there's a negative wealth effect that comes into play. But even just trade wars, tariffs, I mean, who knows what's going to happen there? But a lot of the disruptive policies that the current administration is following, and as I've asked many people on this channel before, even if they're successful, let's assume for a moment that Trump ends his 4 years getting done everything he wanted to get done the way he wanted to get it done. Can we get there without some short-term pain to the economy and the markets and whatnot? Most people I've talked to have said no. We're going to go through kind of a painful transition to be able to get to those destinations if we get to them indeed. So there's all this disruption, right? So that's the present, right? Adding a bunch of additional uncertainty and probably downward pricing pressure on houses. Then we have the future, right? And this is the demographic story, right? And you just started
Mhm.
talking about, boomers that, are dying. So there's a forced estate sale for the heirs or vice versa. The kids are moving another place. Boomers are still relative. I mean, there's the younger boomers are still hitting retirement age, right?
That's right.
So the boomers aren't in the mass, and I hate to use this term, but in the mass die-off phase yet,
That's
right?
right.
The
That's
silent
right.
generation is going through that right now.
Right.
But they're not that far away. I mean, the oldest
That's right.
boomers are probably beginning to die off, right? And as we go forward 5 years, that's going to get more pronounced. As we go forward 10 years, it's definitely going to get more pronounced. And I've mentioned this in past discussions with you, just sort of philosophizing about it is housing going to have this like 20-year headwind at some point against it, as you just have a lot of boomers being forced to downsize or pass away, and all that inventory comes online. Um, are we beginning to see the start of that wave yet?
I think we are just beginning, Adam.
Okay.
I mean, like, just beginning. And I think that it's going to start not necessarily by them dying. I
Yeah.
know that sounds terrible, but it's
No,
going
but
to,
but they have to
yeah,
go into assisted living, or maybe they're going to go live with their
right.
kids, right? Yeah.
Or they're going to get rid of their second home, their
And
third
I'm sorry,
home,
I'm glad you mentioned that because
their
yeah, they've
fourth
been
home. Yes,
they've, and sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I've mentioned this many times. Boomers changed behavior. Everybody thought they were going to downsize, and some actually did. But even if they did downsize, they didn't sell their previous home because they began looking at real estate the way they looked at the stock market. Oh, my home keeps going up every year. I'll
that's
just hold
right.
on to it. I'll rent it out. It'll become a cash flowing property for me, right? So they have all these excess properties. And to your point, you're getting on later in life. This is complicated, stuff you don't need in your life, or you're getting worried about, okay, I'm now spending down my wealth and I need to start liquidating some of this stuff, or just I'm worried about the housing market. All sorts of factors are coming into play now that, I guess to your point, are going to start influencing them to start dumping or at least getting rid of those excess properties.
Absolutely. And I think, they make up a larger portion of our mom and pop landlord class. And I think what both of these disasters, everybody thinks, oh, this happened to North Carolina. It happened to 7 states, Helene. Milton happened to Florida, Beryl happened to Houston, and then we've had the fires out in LA, which LA had a very low owner occupancy rate, a very low home ownership rate. What's actually happening is impacts to the landlord class. You had, I can't even tell you how many short-term rentals here in North Carolina and in these areas in Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, um, it, tons of short-term rentals. And so for people that did not live in these areas, okay. And so, I have a friend in LA. She was renting in Altadena. Her landlord was renting in the Palisades. Her landlord lost her home in the Palisades where she was renting and the one she owned in Altadena. But people told me on X Twitter nobody was renting in the Palisades, and I knew that wasn't true, just
Right.
anecdotally. And so, I think what's happening is you've got a massive impact to the landlord class who's looking around and saying, "Why on earth would I deal with these headaches? I mean, look at this insurance, look at these taxes, like." What this is just too much. And by the way, it's not just, of course, the boomers. It's also those folks that got involved. We really started seeing this going crazy. It started in the early 2000s, and although there was a little hiccup, is what I'm now calling it, during the GFC. It just went even nuttier. And I think people still have no clue, Adam, how much speculation there is. I mean, why you would need 45,000 short-term rentals in Los Angeles is just beyond me. 15,000 in Austin. I mean, there San Diego, the entire I mean, it's insanity. And we looked at that slide in your conference. So it's the boomers plus the landlord class, all of these folks, the millennials really piled in, and they just can't carry this anymore. It's not making sense. I just had an ex post go somewhat viral for me, where it was just a young woman talking about her short-term rental in the Smokies, which, you know, the Smokies, everybody's sold as it's recession proof because people can drive here, and it is a very popular area, but you don't need 8,000 short-term rentals there.
Hmm.
Like, it's a very small county. Okay. And that's not how. And so the video was a TikTok of a young woman saying, "I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Could someone just please tell me what's going on? I made $100,000 last year. We're a top host. We do everything right. We get blah blah blah." And she's like, "And I have no bookings, and I have no idea." And it never, not once in the whole kind of tirade, she's like, "Should I do this with my listing or this?" The economy never even factored, because, if she's even reading mainstream media, she doesn't see I mean, the labor market's great, right? Like, and so you have so many of these investors that act. I mean, they bought these things sight unseen, Adam. They had no idea what they did, no analysis. They even built them. I mean, spec building. The amount of luxury spec building. So I know we were talking about the boomers, but it starts with them, but then it just, the speculation is just across all of the cohorts.
So let me bring it to brass tacks then on this. So I hear you ringing a warning bell, pretty loud one, that the top is in for the housing market nationally. Um, and you're raising all these, risk factors here. Now, Melody, I know that you were a very active participant in the mortgage industry during the first housing bubble bursting. So you got a front row seat to the damage and the you know the, yeah,
Destruction.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, just the calamity that was for so many families. Um, Relative to the pain we saw in the housing market back then, what do you predict it's going to be this time around? What's your best estimate at this part around? Will it be half as bad, a quarter as bad, twice as bad? What do you think?
So the very first time you and I talked in September of 2023, Adam, I will never forget saying this on your show because of all the hate I got afterwards. But I basically said that this is going to be much worse than what we experienced back then because it's actually going to play out what happened. And you know, it's hard to explain. In 2012, you know, you had hundreds of thousands of foreclosure. It was so bad. But then all of a sudden, problems seemed to disappear overnight. And that's when Wall Street got involved. They went to these auctions, they bought up all these homes. They also bought them in the non performing loan sales, which is an analysis I've talked to you a little bit about. And so it was all of a sudden, all the pain was gone because they were bought up. Either they were bought up, you know, bought by these investors through the auctions and kind of let the banks off the hook, or there was capital out there to kind of soak up those homes. That's not going to be the case now. And in fact, believe it or not, Adam, some of these cases that I'm working on where people have asked for my help on a default matter, the loans were originated in 2005, 2006,
Mm,
and they've been able to skate this long, Adam. And that I know absolutely. I mean, I saw it myself firsthand, like just through all of these workout programs, how you could just keep kicking the can. And so I think we thought we came up with a term, kick the can in, you know, 2023. In reality, we have been kicking the can since 2008. And it's just through a whole bunch of hopium and narrative and all of that good stuff. But there are literally people out there, and I see this all over my books, that have been behind since that time period. And so I think it's going to be much worse. And I think the wealth destruction is going to be much worse. And I think that, you know, the counties and the municipalities are going to be in a lot of trouble because what you had last time is you were able to milk the banks for these properties. You could charge them these vacant property registration fees, which, like in Pasco County, I think is like 1,000 a day. I think I even told you this story about one of my presidents coming to me once, thinking he was gonna have to move out of the country because he got a personal summons on for like millions of dollars on one of these vacant property registrations. And what that is where if the property is vacant, so all the counties and municipalities got smart. They're like, okay, we can charge for this. And this is a way to make revenue when revenue is down from, you know, other ways. And so they got very rich off the default situation last time. That's not going to happen this time because I have a feeling that many of these properties have been sold through these private note sales that you and I have also talked about,
yeah.
and that the counties and by the way, the investors, you know, the investors that bought so many and that will walk away, the counties are going to be left with these, and they won't have know what to do. And they won't be getting in all those fees like they got before. And so I think this is also going to bankrupt municipalities. And so if you know we don't if we don't get some sort of you know productive jobs that wages would you know could keep up with these home prices, then essentially you're looking at just destruction on a scale that you know is actually hard. I think about maybe perhaps, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but what's new? Think about Detroit. Think about places where there's so much vacancy. There's so much blight. You know, my first day in foreclosure or when I was managing default, I got told about a property that was firebombed in Detroit, one of our properties, like total loss. I mean, those are the types of, because you have all this vacancy all over the place. There was a huge article in I think the Wall Street Journal, I can't remember, about Atlanta and how the institutional landlords were struggling because they had all these squatters. But if you've seen what I've seen across this country, there is vacancy everywhere. And this is going to very quickly become a safety issue. And these municipalities, they're not going to be people writing those property tax checks, and they are going to suffer badly. So I think it's going to get a lot worse than previously.
Wow. All right. So that's heavy. And a
Sorry.
word that has not come out of your mouth yet in this discussion is recession. Um, so I'm assuming you think this correction, maybe not necessarily, that bad, but some material correction is inevitable. It's going to have to happen. Obviously, a recession would probably make it a lot worse. Um, but could it almost sort of like 2000, the great financial crisis, could housing actually be the trigger of the next recession? And not so much from a bad loan standpoint, the way that it was the first time, but that as housing starts correcting this much, you get a real negative wealth effect, and people, restrict their spending, and then that gets manifested in hitting economic growth, and then companies have to lay off, and then you get kind of in a vicious recessionary cycle there.
And I think we're there. I mean, I think I mean, you're seeing, and I haven't had a chance to dive in, but job openings for construction just fell through the floor. Like, I mean, they just plummeted. I think that we're getting there. You're seeing bankruptcies for remodeling cabinet companies, like all of these ancillary businesses to the housing market. That I think when I was on your show, I talked about how when I would drive around these new build sites, what would make me kind of sick to my stomach would be all these little businesses that have popped up around it, restaurants, taco
Yeah.
trucks, swimming pools, cleaners, nurseries, all these businesses that were banking, that were either relying on the labor, the construction folks to keep them going, or banking on that new subdivision being filled with young children that would then fill those nurseries and things like that. And that is you when you so I watched the bankruptcy notices come across. There's one account, I can't remember what it is on X, but it is all of these ancillary services to housing. And I think that you could even see, we can talk about this if you want to, but a lot of people are talking about the impact to the building or to the builders with immigration, and if there is deportation. But we had already heard rumors of people going back because they couldn't find work. And so I think it's already started, and it is just going to get worse. And absolutely, I think you're right. Like that I call it the zest effect now. Instead of the wealth effect, Adam. And
Because as people see their estimate go down, they
correct, right. So as I think the zest effect, as we start to get some of these transactions, and you've said this for years, once we get those transactions on the margin, I mean, that is what's going to push that zest effect down, and people are going to start panicking. And I gotta be honest with you, I think that that's already started, and I think that spending has been pulling back in very key areas, and that is just going to continue to worsen. So, unless again, we have some sort of breakthrough where we all can get really high paying jobs and not have inflation.
Okay. Wow. All right. Folks, I did not expect that we were going to get this heavy in
Uh,
this conversation, but it is totally validating the decision to have made this a special report. So, Melody, thank you for coming on. Thank you again for being so courageously transparent in how you see things, because I know that, as you mentioned several times here, we've talked about a lot of these issues or a lot of these risks, and in many cases you have been saying, yes, I think this is likely to happen, and you've gotten a lot of heat for it, right? And I'm sure it doesn't feel great to be validated, you know, now that we're further along the timeline, because nobody wishes for a housing market,
right,
crash.
right.
But again, I know you're this, you are the analyst everybody dreams of, who just crunches the numbers as best they see it, and then delivers, what the numbers tell them. You're not putting any spin or sugarcoat, or there's no agenda behind what you're doing. Look, I got a lot of other questions for you, ending with, okay, so what's your advice to, potential home sellers, potential home buyers, potential real estate investors, whether they own a property now or want to get into the market? We're going to get into all that and more, much more, when you come appear on Thoughtful Money's Spring Online Conference. So we're going to start wrapping things up now here. But Melody, I guess real quickly before I wrap it up, is there anything else that's on your radar right now that you're just burning to let folks know about?
I just want to reiterate the fact that I think it is noteworthy, very noteworthy that these two studies about the housing shortage came out. And I think they were well timed, meaning that I think you're about to see a real change in that narrative, because we don't need to build, build, build. That's not. And so I think people need to really soak that in, because they've been living, that narrative has driven this market since 2017 when NAR started pushing it. And
Yeah.
I believe that in reality, what happened is people started selling homes a little bit differently through technology, social media. And that's why you saw those drops in inventory on, National Association Realtor. That it's those entities supply those numbers to the Fed. And so this has been a narrative and it's not accurate. And unless the robots need houses, we are going to have far too much inventory in the future. Very similarly to Japan, who has millions of vacant homes that Americans have gone over and tried to buy because those homes are just not needed for the population.
I'm writing that down. Unless the robots need homes, we're gonna have excess inventory. Um, all right, um, Melody. I just want to again extend my appreciation for you being willing to come and share your outlook with us anytime I ask you to. I feel like I'm probably going to be abusing that generosity of yours going forward, if indeed things start to pick up from here, because I'm sure going to have more and more people that are going to want to get audible updates as we begin to go through all this. All right. Well, look, Melody, for folks that want to follow you and your work, where should they go?
So you can find me on X Twitter at M3_Melody, Melody, M3 Melody Substack, and M3 Melody YouTube.
All right, awesome. And Melody, as usual, when I edit this, I'll put up the links to the URLs to those on the screen. Folks, I'll also put the links in the description below the video here. So definitely go subscribe to Melody's Substack and go watch her YouTube channel and follow her on X. But also make sure that you watch her in the deeper dive that we're going to get into at the Thoughtful Money Online Spring Conference. Again, to go do that, just go to thoughtfulmoney.com/conference and make sure you go sign up soon, because we are still offering the early bird discount price. That's the lowest price you're going to get for the conference. So I want as many people to get that lowest price as possible. A reminder, if you're a premium subscriber to our Substack, you get an additional $50 off of that early bird price. Just if you're one of those folks, just go look in your email. You'll see the code that I've emailed you prior. And as Melody said, this is housing for a large chunk of Americans. It's the biggest asset they have. It's a big financial part of their lives. And if you are, if you're a homeowner, if you're thinking about being a home, you're aspiring to be one, whatever, it's a big decision, especially with all the uncertainty that's out there in the future. So highly recommend that if you're facing big decisions around what to do with real estate, you get advice from a professional, and one that will take that into account with your entire financial position. So if you've got a good professional financial advisor who's advising you on matters like that, great, lean on them hard. If you don't have one, or if you'd like a second opinion from one that does meet that criteria, then consider scheduling a free consultation with one of the financial advisors that Thoughtful Money endorses. To do that, just go to thoughtfulmoney.com, fill out the short form there. Only takes you a couple seconds to fill it out. These consultations are totally free. There's no commitment for you to work with these guys. It's just a free public service they offer to help as many people as possible. The key message I'm giving here is, don't go this alone, right? Especially if it's something that you're feeling anxiety or a discomfort around. All right, Melody. Well, folks, as we say goodbye to Melody, please let her know how much you enjoyed her coming on and sharing her expertise with us in this special report by hitting that like button and then clicking the subscribe button below, as well as that little bell icon right next to it. Melody, thanks so much again. Just wondering if you have any parting bits of counsel for people that have been watching this, probably even a lot of homeowners, just saying like, oh, geez, wow, my house could maybe lose 10% of its value today, but it sounds like Melody thinks actually the next couple of years are going to be even worse, maybe even worse than what we saw in the 2007 bubble bursting. What bit of counsel would you give to those folks?
Yeah. So one thing I just want to say quickly is that I think that January is going to be a little bit slower. But I think that it's going to the engine is going to rev back up in March. So just want to tell everybody that this
It's not going to drop tomorrow by 10%.
Correct. And so this will play out through the year, and I'll update everyone. But what I would say, and this is what I'm seeing on X Twitter, is that there are folks that really have no idea how much inventory there is out there. And if you are looking to sell in the next year or two, please, my advice would be go ahead and list it. There's no harm in listing it. Just see what kind of interest you get so you can have a more realistic understanding of your zest effect. And then on the other side of it, I would say to the folks that, I mean, they're exhausted, Adam. They're just exhausted. These young kids who have been trying to buy a home, some of them very well positioned. They have savings, they could qualify, but they're looking around and saying, I don't want to risk everything on this.
Right.
Because guys, it's not just your finances you're risking. It's oftentimes your well-being, because when you have to worry when you're married and having to have this financial distress, it can create so much stress on a young family. And I've seen it so many times. And so I urge everyone, I know you want that home, just to be cautious. And I think that there is going to be opportunity. And even now in some areas, you can be super aggressive, and perhaps find something that could be okay for you for the next 10 years, if that's your goal. But if you know that you're going to be moving soon, and you don't have that huge deposit and you don't have those reserves, my advice would be to wait but hold on, because you can just simply look at all throughout history, Adam. You can, or the recent history where we have the data, you can look at that median income and you can look at that home price. And I can tell you, it has never been this unaffordable, and it does not make sense. The math is not mathing. So just hold on, and you will have an opportunity. So that would be my final words for today.
All right. Very valuable words. Melody, can't thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming on doing the special report.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. It's my pleasure.
All right. And everybody else, thanks so much for watching.